Hi, my name is Arely Morales, and thank you for joining me today on this little talk where I'm gonna go over sharing with you a little bit more about my practice from influences early on in my career, what has led me to create the paintings that you see in the show, and also a little bit about what I'm currently exploring in my studio. So thank you so much for joining me. And to tell you a little bit about what I do, in my paintings, I use portraiture a lot to express ideas and question issues of identity, humanity, and invisibility of my community. My interest on these issues come mainly from my personal experience of being an immigrant in the United States and the deep love that I have for my culture, my community. Let's see. I was born in Mexico and I lived there until I was 14 years old. And I share this with you because I feel that my background has influenced deeply everything I've created in relationship to my art. And so I was 14 years old, a teenager, and I, like you can see in these photos, I come from a culture that is full of colors, full of folklore, full of traditions, and I love that aspect of my upbringing. Later on, you will see how it also comes back in my art practice. And this year, 2021, it will be 16 years that I've been away from my home country and that I haven't been able to visit back. And this has, I feel, caused even a deeper love for my culture, for my heritage, not being able to visit and just kind of holding on to my roots and what I remember of my childhood. Once I moved to the United States, I came to a town of East Texas called Nacogdoches, Texas. That's where I currently live and work as well nowadays. And this experience of moving into a new country, new culture, had a huge impact on myself as a human being and also in my practice, as I always felt that I was out of place. I felt that I was invisible, that I didn't fit. And it was just a very rough time. Also, I didn't speak any English when I arrived to the United States. So that was also very rough for me. There was a lot of sad feelings around this couple of years after I moved to the United States. And once I've started going to college, I started to think about these feelings of the years that I had experienced here in the United States. And I wanted to create work that celebrated and explored my identity, as for a very long time I felt that I lost any sense of who I was and I wasn't comfortable with myself, from the way I looked, from my background, just from the fact of feeling that I didn't belong in here. And this is just some of the works that I created around that time. I was trying to learn how to draw the figure, but I also started to look for ways to incorporate either symbols or elements that could speak also about my background or my culture. In this case, like for this little self-portrait, it was like including that cactus, which is a symbol in that is in our Mexican flag. So it's very tied to identity. Here's other works like this one. This one is highly influenced by the holiday tradition of the Day of the Dead, which I grew up loving, and I'm just very passionate about this day, which it's much about family and thinking about the loved ones that we've lost, and yeah, so I wanted to share that with the viewer as well. Here's one more of around that time. This one, kids breaking a piñata. I grew up breaking endless piñatas. We do this on birthdays all the time. And I feel that my work around that time was much of a celebration and kind of reconnecting with the love that I have for my culture and wanting to share that with others, and things that I was just very happy and proud of. And around the end of my undergrad program in the year 2015, I was also getting ready to start a graduate program in the University of Washington. And I share this with you because this is what became a very important turning point in my art making, coming from making these paintings. In the summer of 2015, Trump announced that his candidacy to run for president, and he publicly profiled Mexicans as drug dealers, rapists, and criminals. And even though there might be some individuals that are criminals, this is not the reality for most of us. And it was just very painful to hear someone publicly talk about my family, my friends, and myself this way. And it also started a wave of negativity, a lot of anxiety and fear within my community by being so publicly attacked in this way. And we were also constantly dehumanized verbally. There was just a lot of anger from other areas of the nation that where they will yell at immigrants to go back to their home country and stuff like that. So it was just a very impactful time during this transition that I was doing to go to grad school, and it totally influenced everything that I created after. Once I got to my grad program, I became very interested in researching and looking into creating works that would speak about these issues and how we were being affected. And I also wanted to celebrate and dignify the hard work that my community do, and that I felt was being very overlooked and very unappreciated. And this is some of the earliest works that I created once I started the program. I took particular interest in domestic labor. And one of the things that also was clear around this time for me was that I not only wanted to speak about my own feelings and experiences, but I also wanted to reach out to my community and learn from them, and also hear the stories and experiences and see how could that influence my work and the struggles that they were facing. This is some of those studies that I did around that time, looking into domestic labor. Here's a few more. I started talking and interviewing friends, family members, and just people that I met around the time, and wanted to hear the stories and get their perspective on how they were dealing and coping with what was going on at the time. And I also started looking into other artists that were creating work that was dealing with similar issues. This was very new to me, this whole new subject. So I was really trying to see what other artists were doing at the time. And an artist that was very significant in this body of work and my time as a graduate student was the work of Jaylin Gomez. And she's a Mexican-American artist from California. And one of the things that Jaylin does is that she paints on magazine pages, like the one that you see here, that show these beautiful homes, beautiful kitchens, beautiful places. And she illustrates the workers that make this happen. In this case, immigrant workers, just to speak about, this places look so great and so beautiful because of the work that goes in behind the scenes, and we often don't see. It often remains in the shadows. And she also makes cutout figures from cardboard and displays them in public places, like the image here on the right side. And I was just really blown away by the power and the visibility that Jaylin was bringing to these issues and to the workers. So it became a very strong influence for me. Another area that I looked into was literature and research by sociologists that were looking into these issues. And during my time at UW, I took a class in the American Ethnic Studies. The class was titled Working Latinos, and it was a sociological examination of working Latinos in the United States, and looked a lot into inequalities at work and also power relations. And I was confronted to a lot of images like the ones that you see here on the screen. Images of immigrant farm workers and the harsh conditions that they worked in, as well as child labor. which continues to happen in the United States, and immigrants are easy targets for this kind of injustices. So I was seeing a lot, learning a lot about this subject. Through that class, I also came across Seth M. Holmes, who is a cultural and medical anthropologist and physician. And he has a book with all these articles, and his work is strongly about social hierarchies and health inequalities. One of the articles that I read from the ones that he's written was about the experience of him spending several summers in Western Washington. And during this time, he was working, observing, and researching among other immigrant workers there. And he examined aspects of the workers' lives, how they lived, their homes, as the image that you see here on the right side. Sometimes that is the case. And also, he exposed a lot about the physical and emotional vulnerabilities that these workers go through, or what they face as they carry these very harsh jobs. And he also exposes a lot about these workers are victims of minimum pay, no government protection because they are undocumented, also verbal discrimination from other co-workers in higher positions, and also sexual harassment. So his work was very, very significant and impactful at the time for my work. Also, the writings of Juan Felipe Herrera, and he is a poet, and a lot of his work is highly, or in his work, he speaks a lot about immigration, about labor, and also about the Chicano experience. And he's got this poem that really stuck with me during this time, titled Mexican Differences, Mexican Similarities. And I'd like to share with you a little bit of an excerpt from that poem. And this poem says, you eat lettuce, we irrigate lettuce. You eat grapes, we irrigate grapes. You decorate Christmas trees, we farm Christmas trees. You eat turkey on Thanksgiving Day, we raise the turkeys for Thanksgiving Day. You sit at the table, we serve the tables. You dance on the floors, we mop the floors. And this poem is just, I found it so powerful in illustrating what I feel is often the reality for a lot of immigrant workers here in the United States, this gap between two groups. And it became very influential, you will see here shortly, in some of the paintings that I created. And with all these influences that I was discovering at the time, I decided to create a series of portraits for my thesis exhibition, which is these 3 paintings that you see here on the screen. 2 of them are currently on view at Talley Dunn Gallery. And with these portraits, there was a few things that I was trying to achieve. I wanted, for one, to bring focus and create a presence for these figures that could bring a lot of visibility, which I was thinking that they didn't have that visibility, or that they were overlooked. And also I wanted to bring elements of our culture, doing so through large scale, bright colors, and also some patterns, as is the case with the painting in the center, Guadalupe. And that was also the first painting that I created out of the 3. Yeah, so that was the thesis work. And now I'm gonna show you some images that that speak about the influences that I took in consideration for each of them. Looking for ways to celebrate my culture and heritage, I look at artists like Wendy Red Star and Kahindi Wiley. And Wendy Red Star, she is a Portland-based artist who was raised in a Crow reservation in Montana. And in her work, she examines the tensions between traditional Native American culture, colonialist histories, and contemporary representations of Native peoples. And when I came across Wendy Red Star, I was just really blown away by the beauty of her work and all the visual elements that she shared about her heritage with the audience. And I just found it very beautiful and very powerful. And with Kahindi Wiley, he paints a lot of Black and brown figures. And what I like about his portrait is that he also shares with the viewer aspects of their culture. Some of those ways would be, for example, with like the clothing that the figures are wearing or accessories that they might be wearing. And I found that very interesting on how not only making a portrait, but allowing the viewer to also get a hint of what's the heritage, what's the culture of this figure. Another aspect of his work that I was very interested on at the time was how he contrasted the figures against backgrounds that were busy with patterns and colors. I just found that very, very beautiful, just like all the colors, all the elements that are taking place on the painting. And so looking at Wendy Red Star and Kahindi Wiley, I started to think and look into ways that I could incorporate similar elements into my paintings. And I instantly thought of Mexican textiles that I kind of like, this is some of the Mexican textiles. There's so many, and there's so many within different regions of Mexico, and I just find them very beautiful and very colorful. And I also have a very deep connection with Mexican textiles, as I share, those images of my early years. I grew up performing folkloric traditional dances since I was little, and I still do. And I'm just very passionate about the fabrics, the colors. So looking at their work and looking for ways for ways for me to speak about my culture, I got really excited to experiment with textiles and showing those in my work. And also, not only it was very personal, but I also find that within my community, a lot of people share the same experience, especially they spend part of their life in Mexico. Most of us will have this experience of performing and dancing. So I found that very neat as well. This is some of the earlier studies that I did for this painting. I knew I wanted a female portrait. Here I'm just playing and thinking, how can I incorporate these patterns? I had never done anything like this before, so a lot of thinking went into this and a lot of experimentation. Here's some collage studies, just again playing with the patterns and what did I wanted the figure to wear, and a few more studies here in this next slide. This one, I was pretty set on the background for this one, but I still wasn't sure about the colors that I was using, for example, for the fabric. How was I incorporating the figure with the background so that they wouldn't feel so disconnected? So here's some of those studies. And the final version is this Guadalupe. And towards the process of developing this painting, I also decided to incorporate some sweat on her face to hopefully speak about someone that's been working for hours. And you don't look that put together. You're in the midst of working, and I feel that also the expression here is very tense and very confrontational to the viewer. So this was a Guadalupe painting. The other two portraits I developed thinking more about the poem by Herrera and the article by Holmes that focus a lot on the farm labor. And at the time, I was seeing a lot of images like these ones that you see here on the screen, images that depict very common scenes. If you go out to the fields, men, women, pregnant women, teens, and even children, they carry heavy baskets on their shoulders for hours under the sun. And above all those harsh conditions, they still manage to get the job done every day. So I was very moved by the strength of these workers. And I also, around the time, came across the work of Xu Weixin, who has created a lot of portraits of laborers, of working men. And looking at his work, he has this series of miners, workers, and I was very blown away by this series, where I feel he brings so much focus and to the harshness, to the harsh conditions that these workers work in daily. And I feel I was very moved by how he shows, for example, the dirt in the faces and also the facial expressions of these workers. And so I feel that he very successfully manages to convey the harshness of the nature of this job that they do. And this highly influenced me to consider including similar clues in my painting. But for this one, I wanted to create a male figure portrait, and this is some of the earliest studies, sketches, considering the idea. You will see that through my practice, I make a lot of studies, and I just love considering many things, from color choices to the pose, especially with the figure. I feel that gestures and the pose can be very significant and have a big impact on how the viewer experiences the portrait. Here's a few more studies. And also at this point, I was considering having the figure with his shirt slightly open to maybe expose his chest a little bit more, and maybe speak about heat exhaustion or being in a very hot climate under the sun. I also came across this photograph by August Sander, which you will see here is later, very shortly, that it was very influential. I love how this worker it's holding this very strong pose, and I love the strength that we were able to see from carrying those heavy bricks. I just find it very beautiful and very powerful. And with that in mind, I decided that I wanted my portrait to maybe have that heavy basket again, from images that I was seeing a lot of workers carrying these super, super heavy baskets. Here's two studies playing with that idea, and I decided to pursue the one on the right where the figure is using both arms to hold that basket. I felt that it expressed that the full body, their full strength is involved in carrying this job that they do. And to show you a few more studies of this, this is once I was on the canvas already, started with the ground and then started blocking the figure. Also, the background went through quite some changes. I started very simple, but then I felt that I wanted to include other workers in the background as well to just, I don't know, I think reinforce the narrative of someone being out there in the farm. And here's some close-ups of those workers in the background. And here's Guadalupe. I'm sorry, not Guadalupe, Juan Jose. And this painting is actually still in the University of Washington. If you're ever around there, you should check it out. It's a beautiful portrait, very colorful. Yeah, so Juan Jose. And moving to the last painting out of that thesis work, for the final one, I wanted to focus on female workers. And through research, through looking, I was very intrigued by how they cover themselves when they're out there in the fields working. And often they will use fabrics or bandanas to cover themselves from the elements, since they're working out in the sun, or maybe might be a very cold climate. And sadly, they also do this as a way to kind of hide themselves and not be seen, to avoid sexual harassment, which is something that has happened over the years and continues to happen as undocumented workers, they're scared to accuse their abusers in fear of getting in trouble themselves. So there's so many stories that I'll hear about, this issue, and women being so vulnerable and being scared to say something. So with this portrait, I was having that in mind, and I decided to create this portrait where the figure is an apple picker, and also besides being draped with all this fabric, she is either pulling or covering her mouth with the fabric. And I wanted to do that as a way to express that she's either rasping for air or for words, and speak about also possibly being silent or hesitant to speak. So that's the thing about the pose here and the gesture with the hand. And around this time, I also came across this painting by Xu Weixin, same artist from earlier. And I was very moved by this one in particular because it shows also an injured worker. And with that in mind, I was like, well, maybe I would like to include that in my painting as well, to speak about just the harshness that the bodies of farm laborers go through their years working out in the farms, and sometimes also getting injured and not being able to go to the doctor or take some time off to heal, as they don't have health insurance, or they just can't afford to not work. They just continue to work, and through the years their bodies will suffer the wear the wear of this really hard work. And so with this hand, I decided to include it to be not damaged, I'm sorry, hurt. And here I'm showing you some of the sketches that I was doing for the hand, just for the specifics of the gesture of that hand and what could work with the rest of the figure that I was contemplating. And here's some images of the painting in development. I started with the ground as well, a little bit of a drawing, and also an under painting, just pulling out some of the light from the ground. And this painting was also very experimental for me with the background. I really enjoyed this process of making this background as I was experimenting with feeling that I didn't have to cover everything in the background, but allowing the viewer to see through the layers of the ground and the drawing underneath the painting. So I had a lot of fun working with that painting because of that. If you haven't seen it in person, I would suggest that if you come across that, you look at the background and kind of see all that is underneath. I'm just very excited about that aspect of that painting. And this is the final version of Maria. And yeah, very, very powerful painting. And again, it's just, trying to show the strength of women that are often victims to a lot of abuses. And here's the three of them together. This is how they were displayed. And to give you a sense of scale, these are not very small portraits. They're kind of large. And here's just a reference from the scale. The figures in these paintings are larger than life size. Also a conscious decision on wanting to make them very monumental and really get the focus and the visibility when someone walks through the gallery or see them in person. And after my time in Washington in the year 2017, I decided to return to Texas. And this year was tricky for me as well, as with the work that I had created up to this point, I was so focused on issues related to immigration. I'd never been so spoken about my identity, being undocumented, being also a DACA recipient. So the idea of moving to a more conservative state was a little frightening. And also at the time, the current president, Trump, he was also trying to get rid of DACA. And I was just very, it was just hard because I felt at the time it was like the only security that I felt I had protecting me. So the idea of losing that, and also, again, a lot of people were really upset around this time and verbally attacking immigrants out and about publicly. And it was just very frightening to contemplate the idea of moving back home. But I also was excited to see my family after being away, for 2 years. And once I moved to Texas, I started to spend more time with my family. And I decided that I wanted to do a portrait of my father. I was, for one, I think seeing him more often, I started to notice the wear of his body from working many years. He's been working a graveyard shift since I remember. And I started, you can kind of see the wear on his body. And I also remember seeing him coming back from work in the mornings and seeing him so tired. And I always feel that even though he's almost about to fall asleep, he will always greet me with a smile and so happy. And I just really had so much appreciation and have appreciation for the work that he's done for me, for his family, and also for all the other parents that are out there in my community that work so hard for a better future for their kids. And with so much attacks and so much negativity targeting immigrants at the time, I really wanted to make a portrait that will dignify the work that they do and elevate it and show my appreciation for that. And in ways to think how could I make that happen, I looked at some of Velázquez's portraits like this one's here that are very monumental and where I feel the subject in these paintings is highly elevated, very almost majestic. And I felt that this would be a great way to to express what I wanted to express by making the painting of my dad, by thinking, for example, of how the subject is really taking over the pictorial space and very large figure within the space that is in the painting. Here's some studies that I did, thinking of his paintings, thinking about my dad and this moment when he returns home from work or he's about to leave to go to work. And here on the left side, it's a color study. On the right side, a value study. And you can kind of see strongly the influence of the use of space, influenced by Velázquez. And this is the final painting. And this is also the largest painting I've created. I really wanted to make a bold statement with scale and make it feel like larger than life size. And just to show you a little bit of scale reference, here's a photo of me and my dad next to his painting. And it was just a very beautiful moment to have him see his finished painting. And yeah, so it's a pretty large painting. If you haven't seen it in person, you should check it out as well. It's pretty monumental. And after this painting, I made a few others that revisited domestic labor. I kind of started to reflect on my experiences with friends that I interviewed in the past. And I was thinking a lot about this moment where Aurora, this worker, this friend, and she picked up her basket of supplies, which is very heavy. They carry so many cleaning supplies. And she was just standing there, taking a moment and kind of like in contemplation, and she was getting ready to go to the next apartment to keep working. And I was just very blown away by just this moment where she's just like still there in space, and the strength of her body holding that basket. And I like that she was unaware that I was looking at her. So it's just a very beautiful moment. I feel it's just, very intimate in a way. Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about that, and also thinking of the pose and this moment of contemplation. I thought of Vermeer paintings, these window paintings that I love and I find very beautiful, where you see these individuals, these subjects, they're unaware of the viewer and they're going about whatever they're doing. And just this moment of contemplation was very interesting to me. And I started to think, well, maybe I should include a window next to Aurora and kind of have that light fall on her. And I also decided that I wanted to keep the background more simple for this one. I really wanted to focus just to be on her in that moment where she's thinking, standing maybe next to a window and in contemplation. And yeah, so this is some studies for the painting of Aurora, which this is the final painting. And I just love the lighting on this one, and the colors. I love the colors and just the pose. Maybe because it's my painting, but there's so many things that I love about every figure in my paintings, and their beauty and their strength. I hope that comes through to the viewer as well. And to give you a sense of scale, this one is a pretty large painting as well. Here, there's a figure standing next to it. After I finished that one with the subject not fully engaging with the viewer, I decided that I wanted to go back and create another portrait that was a little bit more confrontational, another domestic labor. Thinking about the pose and how I could be a little bit confrontational, I came across some of these works by Chuck Close. These two in particular were very interesting to me, where when the viewer is either at eye level or lower from the subject in the paintings. And I was just very interesting on that dynamic and that confrontation that seems to happen with this eye level. And I knew that I didn't want my figure in this painting to shy away. I wanted to be a little bit confrontational and fully engaged with the viewer. I also came across, and I show you this because it played with my decision for the pose as well. Here, this other photograph by August Sander, beautiful photograph. And I used myself for this portrait as well. And this is the final piece, Rosa. And after this one, I created this next painting here. And with this one, I was thinking, besides all the negativity that my community has gone through, that we're going through, and we're still, struggling here and there, I feel that it has also brought us together a little bit more as a community. And I feel also being more open of our struggles and kind of holding each other up, during hard times. And with this painting, I really wanted to show that strength of these women that are standing here in this painting, and they're holding their tools, and they're proud, and they're standing straight and strong. And I hope that comes through this painting, that you can kind of recognize their strength. And I also wanted to dignify their work and make them feel that they matter and that they should be appreciated as well for all that they do. And for this painting, for the pose, I look at some works of Xu Weixin. You will see that he comes a lot through my paintings, especially when it relates to labor, and as well as Kahindi Wiley's paintings. He has beautiful paintings where there's multiple figures that are embracing each other, standing together in the painting. Yeah, so those definitely play a role in me developing this painting as well. And that was actually the last painting that I've created in the last couple of years. Now, I would like to share with you a little bit of what I'm currently exploring in my studio, which is, well, I'm still in the process. I'm still figuring things out, but I would like to share some of that with you. And today, I find myself in a transition from what I've been doing for the last couple of years. As you see, I've been doing a lot of portraits that are very focused on labor and immigrant workers and their lives and bringing visibility to their work. And although I'm still interested on those issues in that area, I'm also interested nowadays a lot in the past and reflecting on what has led my community to leave everything behind and move to the United States in the first place. And this has been highly influenced by the work of photojournalist John Moore, who since 2008 has focused on immigration and border issues. And around 3 years ago, he published this book titled Undocumented. And with this book, he shares with the viewer the people that is directly affected, but also the graphic reality of their experience. And what was very interesting to me about his work was also that he showed us many angles to one issue, the issue of immigration. He not only shows us migrants in their journey, but the federal agents too, sometimes on the hunt with weapons, offering help or medical assistance, or gathering the remains of those who didn't survive the desert, as well as a view into why immigrants decide to leave their country in the first place, from criminal activity, violence, and the reality of a future that offers nothing but poverty and sickness. Who would not dream of living that? And after reflecting a lot on his work, it really got me thinking about this particular moment where immigrants, they are very vulnerable as they are crossing to the United States, and thinking of questions like, why are they leaving? How is their journey? And how are their lives impacted by this life-changing moment? And there's a lot of hope, dreams, fear, sadness, heartbreak, so many emotions attached to just this one event. And having conversations with people and hearing their stories and their experiences, I was very moved by a story of a friend of mine who crossed to the United States with his mother and his younger 3 siblings. At the moment, they were escaping domestic violence. And he tells me that after walking in the desert for several days, he remembers that at night they will find a place to rest and get some sleep. And he also recalls that they will use black plastic bags as sleeping bags to protect themselves from the elements and the dirt and insects. And he recalls this night in particular when he tells me that he was looking at his mother and his siblings on the floor on these plastic bags trying to get some sleep. And he felt a lot of sadness and a lot of rage to see them so vulnerable like this, and to also not know if they will make it, they would survive, they will arrive to where they were going. And this moment, this experience that he shared with me really stuck with me, and it got me thinking and wanting to create a body of work that would focus or explore the harshness of the landscape and how it affects uh, whoever decides to cross, and and all that goes on in between, from deciding to leave through going through this journey of crossing to the United States. And I've been playing with this idea of the landscape, the harshness, being vulnerable. Here's some of the studies that have come from that interest. I have also looked at other artists that, for example, that I think when I see their work, I think of these feelings that I'm trying to explore. For example, this painting of potato eaters, this gathering of these figures in a very dark room, and the muddiness of the colors. And it just feels very heavy. I feel like the emotions feels heavy. Also, for example, works by Anselm Kiefer. From his work in particular, I'm very interested on the ratio of the figure and the negative space, and allowing the landscape to become a subject itself, very vast, which is the case, with the desert. It's very dangerous. It's endless. So I was thinking about his work, and also thinking about the way he renders or illustrates the figure and the landscape. That's been very interesting to me, how it feels very expressive, which is something that I've never done. I feel that until now, most of the portraits that I've created, they are highly influenced by traditional portraiture. They are very crystal clear, they're highly rendered. And I feel that it's been a very conscious decision in wanting to bring that visibility and focus to the portraits that have created. But now I find myself feeling that I want to take my rendering figures in a different direction, in hope that they can be more expressive, more expressive. And you can kind of see here in my sketches, they're not as usual as the one that I shared with you earlier. They're a little bit more expressive. I'm trying to loosen up a little bit more and experiment with how I illustrate the figure. Here's another study that I recently worked with, and again, it's just more expressive. Here I'm thinking about the fine line between life and death. And again, that is very fine for anyone that takes on the journey of crossing the desert. And another artist that has been a lot in my mind with this new body of work is Kathy Kollwitz. And I mean, her work is every time I see one of her works, it just leaves me speechless. And I find her rough and sometimes aggressive mark making very successful in expressing heavy feelings and heavy moments. And it's something that's in my mind a lot in these last 2 years, her work, and hoping to have that quality of expressiveness in my work as well. Yeah, so I love her work, and I'm looking at her work a lot. And here's just to show you a few more other studies that have happened around this subject. These two, they are more focused on female immigrants that cross the border, and how they are also highly vulnerable, as they are often victims of sexual abuse, human trafficking, or even rape as they are crossing. And it's just very heartbreaking. And I'm just showing you some studies that I've created, thinking about this and reflecting on that. Also, I came across this very heartbreaking image here. This is referred to as rape trees. It's very new to me, this idea, or this event, but turns out that smugglers, after they abuse women as they are crossing, they will hang undergarment pieces, kind of like trophies, to kind of show, kind of what they just did. And I just find this very disgusting and very heartbreaking, very shameful too, to think and to know that even men in my own culture are hurting women this way in such a vulnerable moment, when they're crossing. And yeah, so there's a lot of this in my mind this year and last year. And this is one of the latest studies that I'm working with at the time. where again, I'm trying to show you the harshness of the landscape, allowing the landscape to become a subject itself, and just the vulnerability of these figures. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my practice. I don't know where, where I'm going, but I'm very excited to create more work and speak about these issues. And yeah, so thank you for joining me for this introduction of my work, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.